The sound of his hand hitting my face was like a gunshot in a library. Stephen Sinclair had no idea he was siphoning millions into a digital trap I built 3 years ago. I watched him howl behind the bars of a holding cell as I handed him a bill for the wine he spilled. But to understand how I got here, I need to take you back to the Vreeland Tower Ballroom. The slap didn't just break the skin on my cheek, it shattered 30 years of carefully constructed silence. I was standing in the Vreeland Tower Ballroom. It was exactly 10:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. The air smelled like expensive lilies and even more expensive desperation. Stephen Sinclair was standing 2 inches from my face. His breath reeked of top-shelf scotch and entitlement. He leaned in close. I could see the broken capillaries in his eyes. He shoved a crumpled printout against my chest. It was the Q3 expense report I had flagged an hour ago. "Fix it," he hissed. "Make these numbers go away, Catalina." I looked at the paper. He had spent $60,000 on a private villa in Cabo. He labeled it as a consulting retreat. Numbers don't lie, but people do. I kept my voice whisper quiet. "The ledger is locked, Stefan." I told him the truth. "That money is flagged as embezzlement." His face turned a deep bruised purple. He looked around the room. The city's elite were laughing and sipping champagne nearby. He leaned in even closer. "You're just a line item, bitch." Then he swung. His palm connected with my left cheek. The sound was like a gunshot in a library. My head snapped back. My hand lost its grip on my wine glass. The Riedel crystal hit the white marble floor. It shattered into 1,000 jagged diamonds. Cold Chardonnay soaked into my charcoal silk gown. My skin felt like it was on fire. The entire ballroom went silent. I could hear the hum of the HVAC system overhead. I could hear my own blood rushing in my ears. Stefan didn't look sorry. He looked exhilarated. He straightened his tuxedo jacket. Marlowe Ashworth was watching from the edge of the bar. He was the only one who didn't look shocked. He looked ready for a war. I stood perfectly still. My father always said to wait for the opening. I felt a drop of wine crawl down my leg. It was ice cold. I looked down at the shards of glass. My face was reflected in a pool of spilled liquor. I looked small. I looked like a victim. That was my best disguise. Stefan stepped over the mess. He leaned down to my ear. "Go cry to HR, Catalina." He let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "My dad owns the air you breathe." He had no idea. He didn't know I signed his father's paychecks. The ballroom air felt like ice against my skin. Stefan stood there with a smug grin. My cheek was burning. I could feel the heat radiating from the slap. A single drop of Chardonnay hit the floor. The silence in the room was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I looked down at my charcoal silk gown. It was ruined. A dark, wet stain spread across my chest. My hands were perfectly still. Stefan leaned in and whispered something foul. I didn't hear the words. I only felt the vibration of his voice. I turned and walked toward the heavy oak doors. The clicking of my heels sounded like gunshots. I didn't look back at Marlowe. I didn't look at the cameras. I stepped out into the crisp November night. The New York wind bit at my face. I hailed a yellow cab on the corner. The interior smelled of cheap air freshener and old coffee. I leaned my head against the cold window. The city lights blurred into long streaks of gold. I reached my apartment in Queens at 11:14 p.m. It is a small, rent-controlled unit on the 4th floor. The radiator was hissing in the corner. I dropped my keys on the laminate kitchen counter. I walked straight to the bathroom mirror. The light was harsh and flickering. A jagged red mark stained my pale cheek. It looked like a map of a country I didn't want to visit. I grabbed a cotton ball and the bottle of rubbing alcohol. The sting made my eyes water. I didn't cry. My father always said tears were just wasted data. I remember him sitting in his dark study in 2014. The room smelled of expensive tobacco and old paper. He leaned over his mahogany desk and looked at me. He said the best way to watch a wolf is to dress like a sheep. That was the year I started the anonymity protocol. I took a low-level job at Vreeland Global under my mother's name. I wanted to see who would sink and who would swim. I wanted to see who was loyal when no one was watching. I walked to my bedroom and opened the small wooden jewelry box. I pressed the hidden latch on the bottom. A secret compartment clicked open. I pulled out a faded Polaroid from 20 years ago. It showed me as a girl standing with my father. We were in front of a half-finished skyscraper. He wore a sharp suit and a heavy gold signet ring. I reached into the box and pulled out that same ring. The metal was cold and heavy in my palm. I sat on the edge of my bed. The springs creaked under my weight. I picked up my vintage fountain pen. It has a WV engraving on the silver clip. I signed the weekly shipping log for the warehouse. I did it with the hand that didn't shake. My father's blood runs cold in my veins. People think I am just a ghost in a cubicle. They think I am a victim of Stefan's temper. Let them think that for one more night. Numbers don't lie. People do. It was time to look at the ledger. I walked back to the kitchen and sat down. My laptop screen glowed in the dark room. I didn't call the police. I didn't call HR. I opened my laptop and logged into the one account the Sinclairs didn't know existed. The founder's ledger. The sun crawled over the Manhattan skyline like a predator. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The bruise on my cheek was a dark, angry plum color. I reached for my heavy-duty concealer. Layer by layer, the evidence of Stefan's hand vanished. By 8 a.m., my face was a perfect plastic mask. Numbers don't lie, but my skin was currently a beautiful deception. I stepped into the lobby of Vreeland Tower at 8:45 sharp. The scent of expensive floor wax always makes my stomach turn. I took the express elevator to the 42nd floor. The doors slid open with a soft, expensive chime. Stefan was already there, leaning against my desk. He smelled like stale gin and expensive aftershave. He didn't even look at me when he spoke. "You're late, Kat," he muttered. I didn't correct him. I just sat down and placed my bag on the floor. He stepped closer, deliberately bumping into my desk. My lukewarm coffee sloshed over the rim of the paper cup. It pulled around my keyboard in a dark, sticky circle. "You should thank me for not firing you," he said. I watched the brown liquid seep into a stack of invoices. He leaned down, his breath hot against my ear. Making a scene at the gala was a fireable offense. I kept my eyes fixed on the flickering monitor. "I apologize, Mr. Sinclair," I whispered. He chuckled and walked toward his father's corner office. Arthur Sinclair was standing by the window, staring at the street. He looked smaller than he did yesterday. His hands were stuffed deep into his trouser pockets. He looked nervous, like a man watching a storm roll in. I waited until they closed the heavy mahogany door. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I didn't open the standard accounting software. I pulled up a terminal window and ran a backdoor script. The code bypassed the company's primary firewall in seconds. I was looking for the Blue Horizon project files. It was a flagship development in Long Island City. On paper, it was a multi-million-dollar success story. In the ledger, it was a hollowed-out shell. I pulled up a series of wire transfer records. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. $500,000 had moved yesterday. It went from the escrow account to an entity called SS Lux. SS Stefan Sinclair. The paper trail was as clumsy as his footwork at the gala. He wasn't just a bully. He was a thief. I looked at the timestamp on the last transfer, 11:58 p.m. While I was cleaning my wound, he was draining the vault. People always ask why I stay in this cubicle. They wonder why the heir to a fortune works for entry-level pay. You can't see the rot from the penthouse suite. To find the termites, you have to live in the walls. I leaned back and checked the time. It was 10:14 a.m. My cheek started to throb beneath the thick makeup. Stefan thought he was stealing from a faceless corporation. He didn't realize he was stealing from my inheritance. And I'm a very protective daughter. The heavy steel door of the archives groaned as I pushed it open. It was 11:15 a.m. The air down here smelled like stagnant dust and old paper. My skin felt tight under the heavy layer of clinical strength concealer. I could still feel the phantom heat of Stefan's hand against my jaw. Numbers don't lie, people do. And Stefan was currently lying to the tune of $500,000. I walked past rows of gray filing cabinets toward the back corner. Marlo Ashworth was waiting there, her hands twisting a silk scarf. She looked at my face and let out a sharp, jagged gasp. Her fingers reached out but stopped just short of my skin. She whispered, "Catalina, your face. What did he do?" I didn't flinch. I just looked at her and said, "He forgot who I was." "Let's look at the ledger." I pulled a slim manila folder from the top of a shred-only bin. Inside was a draft of a merger agreement with a rival firm. It wasn't a partnership. It was a total dissolution of Vreeland Holdings. I pointed to the final page. Arthur Sinclair's signature was already there in thick black ink. The date on the document was yesterday. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Marlowe's face went gray in the dim fluorescent light. She leaned against a cold metal shelf for support. "They're selling us out," she whispered. "Blue Horizon isn't a development project." I looked at the line items for the Lycée site. The numbers were hollowed out. It was just a graveyard for moved cash. I told her about the $500,000 transfer to SS Lux. Marlowe gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. She said, "We have to go to the board, Catalina, now." I shook my head slowly. I thought about my father's gold signet ring sitting in my jewelry box. I thought about the way the lobby guards straightened their backs when I walked past. They don't know why they do it, but they feel the authority. I told Marlowe a slap is a misdemeanor. I want them erased. I want every cent they stole back in the Vreeland accounts before they realize I'm watching. I reached into the bin and pulled out another crumpled page. It was a liquidation schedule for the company's real estate assets. The penthouse, the private jet, even the historic archives we were standing in, everything was priced to move fast. My thumb traced the embossed violin logo at the top. It felt like a betrayal of my father's very bones. Marlowe grabbed my wrist, her voice a frantic whisper. "They're liquidating everything, Catalina. If you don't step forward now, there won't be a company left to lead." The heavy mahogany door of Stefan's office clicked shut behind me. It was exactly 11:22 a.m. The scent of expensive sandalwood and stale espresso filled the room. Stefan was leaning back in his Italian leather chair. He looked like a man who had already won. He didn't ask me to sit. I stood on the plush navy carpet and waited. Numbers don't lie, but the man staring at me was a master of fiction. He tossed a glossy photograph onto the glass desk. I looked down. It was a grainy shot from the security feed in the supply room. I was holding a box of high-end stationery. In the photo, it looked like I was stealing. In reality, I was just reorganizing the inventory for my father's old files. He tapped his manicured finger on the glass. He said, "I could have you in handcuffs by noon, Catalina." I let my lower lip tremble just enough. I shifted my weight and gripped my cheap polyester handbag. My palms were damp, but not from fear. He pulled a single sheet of paper from a silver tray. It was a non-disclosure agreement. The bold text at the top felt like a physical weight. It was a gag order for the gala. He wanted to bury the memory of his hand hitting my face. "Sign this," he muttered, sliding a heavy gold pen toward me. "Sign it, and the police never see that footage." I looked at the pen. It was a fake, a cheap imitation of the one my father carried. I reached out, making sure my hand shook visibly. I let the gold pen clatter against the glass desk once. I whispered that I was sorry. I told him I didn't want any trouble. He let out a sharp, jagged laugh. He said, "That's a smart girl. Know your place." While he was busy gloating, I looked at his computer monitor. My eyes scanned the open tabs. I saw the Blue Horizon project logo. I also saw the USB drive I'd inserted into his docking station. It was hidden behind a stack of folders. The little green light was blinking rapidly. It was cloning every single file on his hard drive. I picked up the pen and leaned over the desk. My shoulder brushed against his keyboard for just a second. That was all I needed to plant the keylogger. I signed my name in a slow, jagged script, the blue ink looked standard. He didn't know the chemical composition would cause it to vanish in 2 days. As I signed, his phone buzzed on the desk. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a text to his father. "The analyst is handled. She's scared. Proceed with the Blue Horizon transfer." The timestamp said 11:28 a.m. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The liquidation wasn't coming. It was already here. I handed him the paper with a submissive nod. He didn't even look at me as he waved me out. I walked back to my cubicle in the open plan office. The hum of the air conditioner felt like a low growl. I sat down and opened a hidden terminal window. The keylogger was already sending back data. I saw his password stroke by stroke. I signed the NDA with a shaky hand. He didn't notice I used the blue ink that would fade in 48 hours. He also didn't notice I planted a keylogger on his workstation while he was busy gloating. The blue light of my laptop screen is the only thing keeping the shadows at bay. It is 2:14 a.m. in my Queens apartment. I am sitting on the floor. My back is against the cold radiator. My fingers are hovering over the keys. The keylogger is screaming with new data. Stefan's password worked. I'm inside his personal cloud drive now. A folder sits at the top. It is labeled insurance. I click it. My heart performs a slow, heavy thud. It is not insurance. It is a digital gallows. I see a subfolder for the chairman of the ethics committee. I open a file named August 14th. A high-resolution photo fills the screen. It shows the chairman in a dim hotel suite. He is handing a thick envelope to a woman who isn't his wife. There are 12 more folders just like it. Each one contains a different board member. One has tax evasion records. Another has audio of a drunken racist rant. The Sinclairs aren't discreet. They are predators keeping the entire board on a leash. My breathing is shallow. The air in my studio feels thin and metallic. I lean forward until my forehead touches the glass of the screen. I see a folder at the bottom. It says Ashworth. My throat goes dry. I think of Marlowe. He was my father's most trusted friend. He is the only one who knows who I really am. I hesitate. My mouse cursor trembles over the icon. Is he a victim too? Or is he the one holding the camera? I click the folder. It is empty. No photos, no recordings, just a single text document. I open it. It contains a list of dates and dollar amounts. Each one matches the transfers. $500,000. $200,000 and $0.2 million. The total is staggering. My hands are ice cold now. I can hear the hum of the refrigerator. It sounds like a low mechanical growl. Numbers don't lie. People do. The ledger shows Marlowe was the one approving the shells. He wasn't stopping them. He was helping them clear the path. I stand up and walk to the window. The streetlights on the corner flicker. I feel a sudden sharp chill. I am completely alone. Every ally I thought I had is a ghost, or a traitor. I look back at the screen. A new notification pops up. It is a calendar invite. Final liquidation meeting, 9 a.m., Thursday. That is less than 36 hours away. They are moving faster than I anticipated. The disappearing ink on that NDA is still wet. I have to move now. I grab my father's gold signet ring from the desk. The metal is heavy and unforgiving in my palm. I press it into my skin until it leaves a mark. I am not just a data analyst anymore. I am the ghost in their machine. The Sinclairs weren't just killing the company. They were wearing its skin. They bled the city dry. I was the only one with the scalpel to stop them. The countdown in my head is louder than the hum of the office server. It is Wednesday, 1014 p.m. We have less than 20 hours until the board meeting. My fingers felt like ice as I typed the encryption key into my terminal. I watched Stefan through the glass of his corner office. He was leaning back in his Italian leather chair, looking untouchable. I hit send on the anonymous email. The subject line was simple. Vreeland Trust Unredacted Physical Archives. I saw his monitor flicker with the notification. He sat up so fast his silk tie caught on the desk edge. His eyes scanned the screen with a predatory hunger I recognized. It was the same look his father had before devouring a competitor. The email told him a hard drive existed in the basement archives. I claimed it contained the original, unredacted trust documents my father signed. Documents that could nullify his power of attorney. I watched him type a single word into his search bar. Basement access codes. Numbers don't lie, Stefan, but I certainly do. I walked toward the office break room to put distance between us. The smell of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner filled the small space. I gripped the edge of the laminate counter until my knuckles turned white. My heart was a hammer against my ribs. I needed to see if he would take the bait alone. He didn't disappoint. 10 minutes later, I heard the heavy mahogany door of his office click shut. I stepped into the hallway, smoothing my polyester skirt. He was walking toward the service elevators with a frantic, uneven stride. He didn't even look at me as he passed. I was just the help. I was just the quiet analyst with the bruised cheek. I followed at a distance, my heels silent on the plush carpet. The elevator display glowed with a soft blue light as he pressed the button. B4, he muttered under his breath. The basement level. The archives are a labyrinth of steel shelves and shadows. It is the perfect place for a man who thinks he is a king. I reached the elevator bank just as the door slid shut on his smug face. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My thumb hovered over the remote override for the floor's security seal. If he enters that room, he doesn't leave until I say so. Marlowe Ashworth's betrayal still feels like a shard of glass in my chest. But I can't think about mentors or family friends right now. I have to be the wolf my father raised me to be. The air in the hallway felt thin, cold, and predatory. I checked the time on the wall clock. 1:42 p.m. The trap is set. He fell for it. By tomorrow morning, Stephen Sinclair will be exactly where I need him, in a room with no windows and only one exit. The basement air smells like wet concrete and forgotten debts. It is exactly 11 p.m. on Wednesday night. I'm standing in the shadows of the security kiosk and in the lobby. The marble floor is freezing under my thin flats. Old Elias is the only guard on duty tonight. He was my father's head of security for 20 years. He looks at my face and then at the gold signet ring on my finger. He doesn't ask a single question. He just slides a master keycard across the scratched metal counter. I take it. My fingers brush the cool plastic. Stefan is already down there. I can see him on the small flickering monitor behind the desk. He is paced like a caged animal in front of the B4 vault door. He keeps punching the keypad with his thumb. The red light rejects him every single time. Numbers don't lie, Stefan. You don't have the clearance. I leave Elias and step into the service elevator. The ride down is silent and shaky. My heart is a hammer against my ribs. I can feel the bruise on my cheek pulsing with every beat. I remember 2010. I was just a girl then. My father stood me in front of this very vault. He made me memorize the tumblers by sound alone. Click, click, thud. He told me that a Vreeland never stores paper where a fire can reach it. The elevator door's grown open. The hallway is lit by a single buzzing fluorescent tube. I see Stefan's silhouette at the end of the corridor. He's sweating through his $5,000 suit. He hears my footsteps and spins around. His eyes are bloodshot and wide with greed. He yells at me to give him the code. I don't say a word. I walk past him and swipe the MasterCard. The heavy steel door groans and swings inward. He pushes past me into the room. He expects stacks of bearer bonds or hard drives. He expects the unredacted archives of $1 billion empire. That the room is empty, there are no boxes, there are no filing cabinets. There is only a single floor-to-ceiling mirror bolted to the back wall. Stefan stops dead in his tracks. He stares at his own reflection in the dim light. I step inside and pull the door shut behind us. The lock clicks into place with a final heavy thud. We are sealed in. He turns to me, his face twisting into a snarl. He looks like a monster in the mirror. He lunges at me and grabs my shoulders. His breath smells like expensive scotch and desperation. He screams at me. Where's the drive, you old hag? I don't flinch. I don't blink. I just slowly raise my right hand. I hold it up so the light catches the heavy gold signet ring. The Beeling crest shines like a warning. He freezes. The blood drains from his face until he is as white as the walls. He finally sees the ledger. He finally sees who is holding the pen. Stefan didn't tremble when he saw my father's signet ring. He laughed. The sound echoed off the cold steel walls of the vault. It was a jagged, ugly sound. He stepped toward me, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the floor. I felt my back hit the back of the vault. The air in here felt thin and smelled like old ozone. Stefan reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight enough to leave a mark. He twisted my hand until I had to let go. The gold ring clattered onto the floor. He picked it up and held it to the light. He called me a thief. He said I was a delusional little girl playing dress up. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Stefan pulled out his phone. The screen glowed white in the dim vault. I watched him dial. The contact name on the screen was the E. of Vreeland. It was his father, Arthur Sinclair. The call lasted exactly 45 seconds. I know because I was counting the pulses in my neck. Stefan told him he had the girl and the evidence. 10 minutes later, the heavy vault door groaned open. Arthur Sinclair walked in. He looked tired but triumphant. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my apartment. He didn't look at me like a person. He looked at me like a bug he had finally caught. He walked over and spat on the floor near my feet. The white marble floor was stained. I sank to my knees. I let the tears come. They were hot and real. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my cheap polyester blouse. It felt rough against my skin. Arthur stood over me, smelling of expensive scotch and cigars. He told me they were calling the police. He said I would spend the rest of my life in a cage. Corporate espionage is a heavy charge in New York. I looked at the floor, sobbing into my hands. My palms were damp. I felt small. I felt defeated. I watched Arthur check his gold watch. It was 11:42 p.m. He told Stefan to prep the documents for the 9 a.m. meeting. They had everything they needed now. My father's ring sat on the edge of the mirror table. It looked lonely there. Arthur leaned down and gripped my chin. His fingers were cold and smelled like nicotine. He forced me to look up at him. He told me I was a good little analyst. He said I should have stayed in my cubicle. Then he said the house always wins. I felt a chill run down my spine. But then I stopped crying. I looked him right in the eye. I felt the weight of the secret ledger in my mind. The numbers were all there. I smiled through the salt of the tears. It was a slow, sharp smile. I told him he was right. The house does win, Arthur. That is why I bought it. Arthur Sinclair stood in the vault doorway. His eyes were wide. His hands were shaking. He didn't see the police behind him. He didn't see the handcuffs I expected. Instead, the heavy steel door creaked wider. Marlowe Ashworth stepped into the fluorescent light. Behind him stood the entire board of directors. They looked like a row of vultures in tailored suits. It was 11:43 p.m. on a Wednesday night. The air in the basement was cold and smelled of ozone. Arthur looked at Marlowe. "Get this girl out of here," Arthur barked. "She's a thief." Marlowe didn't move. He didn't even look at Arthur. He looked at me. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. My skin felt raw where Stefan had grabbed me. I reached into my polyester bag. I pulled out my tablet. The screen glowed blue against the gray vault walls. I tapped a file labeled Gala Security. The video started playing. There was Stefan. There was the wine glass shattering. There was the slap that echoed through the ballroom. The board members watched in silence. I could hear Arthur's heavy, wet breathing. I tapped the screen again. This was the fresh footage. The camera inside the vault had captured everything from 2 minutes ago. Stefan lunging at me. Stefan's fingers digging into my arm. His face twisted in a predatory snarl. I looked at the chairman of the ethics committee. His face was a mask of disgust. I turned the tablet toward the large wall monitor. I synced the display. A document appeared in massive, bold letters. It was the Vreeland Charter. I scrolled to Article 12, Section 4, the Morality Clause. The text was clear. It was sharp. Any executive who physically assaults an employee forfeits all stock and voting rights. The words seemed to vibrate on the screen. It was the fail-safe my father had written in blood. Arthur's face went from pale to a sickly gray. He looked at the signet ring still clutched in Stefan's hand. He looked at the gold WV crest. Then he looked at me. "Who are you?" he stammered. His voice was a thin, pathetic thread. I stood up straight. I stepped into the center of the light. I could feel the cold floor through my cheap heels. My voice was no longer a whisper. It was the sound of a closing trap. I looked him dead in the eye. "I am Catalina Vreeland," I said. The silence in the vault was absolute. "And you're fired." I reached out and took the signet ring back. It was warm from Stefan's frantic grip. I slid it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. It felt heavy. It felt like home. The board members turned their backs on Arthur. One by one, it was a synchronized execution. They didn't say a word. They just walked toward the elevator. Marlowe stayed behind. He adjusted his silk tie. He gave me a single sharp nod. The numbers on the tablet were still scrolling. The founder's ledger was finally fully active. It wasn't just a list of bank accounts. It was a map of every sin the Sinclairs had committed. The $500,000 transfer to SS Lux flickered in red. I watched the cursor blink. Arthur fell back against the vault wall. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. I suppose he had. I walked past him toward the door. My shadow was long on the concrete floor. The game was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. I reached the elevator and pressed the button. The lobby was 40 floors up. My father always said to watch the wolves. I was done watching. It was time to clear the forest. The elevator door slid open in the lobby. The air was colder here. I stepped out onto the marble floor. My heels clicked against the stone. It sounded like a metronome or a countdown. Stefan was behind me, breathing like a wounded animal. He was still holding his face. The red mark on his cheek was darkening. He looked at the security desk. He saw the 2 guards in their black uniforms. Their names are Miller and Vance. They used to look through me. To them, I was just a ghost in a polyester blouse. Now, they didn't look at Stefan. They didn't look at the acting CEO's son. They looked at me. Their spines snapped straight. Their chins lifted. It was the stance of men who knew exactly who was in the room. Stefan tried to shove past me. He was heading for the revolving doors. He wanted the street. He wanted to vanish before the police arrived. Miller stepped in his way. He didn't say a word. He just placed one hand on the holster of his sidearm. Stefan froze. His eyes were darting around the lobby. He looked like a rat in a maze. "Move," he hissed at Miller. Miller didn't move an inch. He just waited for my signal. I didn't give it yet. I wanted him to feel the walls closing in. Numbers don't lie, Stefan. But projects do? Let's look at the ledger one last time. You think Blue Horizon was your masterpiece. You think you found a hollow shell for your greed. You saw a project in Long Island City. You saw a way to siphon $50 million. You did exactly what I wanted you to do. Blue Horizon wasn't a real construction project. It was a digital trap. A honeypot. I built it in a basement office 3 years ago. Every bank account you used was a mirror. Every dollar you stole went into a blind trust. It is a trust for the 300 employees you fired last Christmas. You didn't steal from the company. You just funded their pensions. I watched you move the money. I watched the timestamps. 11:58 p.m. on a Tuesday. You were so proud of yourself. My father always said the best way to catch a wolf is to give him a sheep. I gave you the sheep, Stefan. You were so hungry you didn't notice the wire inside. I felt my pulse in my thumb. It was steady. My hand went to my silver cuff. I adjusted the metal. It felt cold and real. Marlowe Ashworth walked out of the elevator behind us. He was holding a single manila folder. He didn't look at Arthur. He didn't look at the board. He handed the folder to the ethics committee chairman. It was a DNA test result. It was authenticated by 3 independent labs. It proved my name is Catalina Vreeland. It proved I own every brick in this lobby. Stefan's face went from red to a sickly gray. He looked at the folder. Then he looked at me. "That's impossible," he whispered. His voice was a thin, dry thread. I stepped closer to him. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "Impossible is just a word for things you aren't smart enough to see," I said. I pulled up my phone. One tap on the screen. The Blue Horizon server began to delete itself. The digital evidence of his success was vanishing, but the trail of the theft was permanent. It was etched into the founder's ledger. The police sirens were audible now. The blue and red lights reflected off the glass. They bounced off the signet ring on my finger. Stefan tried to run for the side exit. Vance blocked him. He grabbed Stefan's arm and twisted it behind his back. The sound of the struggle echoed in the empty lobby. Arthur Sinclair just stood by the elevators. He looked like a suit stuffed with straw. His power was gone. His legacy was a pile of fraudulent wire transfers. I felt a cold satisfaction. It was a weight lifting off my chest. But the work wasn't done. The 9 a.m. deadline was still coming. I turned to the chairman. "Cancel the liquidation," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It was a command. As the police finally arrived to lead them out in zip ties, Stefan looked at me trembling. "You planned this? All of it?" I just adjusted my silver cuff and said, "I've been planning this since the day you were born, Stefan. You just provided the finale." The heavy mahogany doors of the 42nd floor swung open without a sound. I walked past the empty reception desk. It was 3014 a.m. The air in the executive suite felt different now. It was no longer a predator's den. It was just a room. I reached the double doors of the CEO office. My hand hovered over the brass handle. I could still smell the faint copper scent of the Sinclair's panic in the hallway. I stepped inside and the motion sensors triggered the floor-to-ceiling lights. The entire Manhattan skyline flooded the room in a cold electric blue. I didn't go to the guest chairs. I walked straight to the high-backed leather seat. It groaned slightly as I sat down. It was too large for me. My father always liked things that made people feel small. I pulled a single manila folder from my bag. This was the Blue Horizon restoration plan. I laid it on the polished surface. Beside it, I placed the vintage fountain pen. The gold WV engraving caught the moonlight. This pen hadn't tasted ink since the day he signed his will. I unscrewed the cap. The smell of old cedar and dried ink filled my lungs. I looked at the first page of the document. It was a wire transfer authorization. This would move $50 million back to the employee pension fund. My fingers felt cold against the warm gold of the pen. I thought about the 300 families who had lost everything last month. Numbers don't lie, but the people who move them certainly do. I signed my name at the bottom of the ledger, Catalina Vreeland. The ink was thick and dark. It looked like a permanent scar on the white paper. I stared at the signature until the moisture dried and memory hit me. It was 2016 in a hospital room in Westchester. The air smelled like antiseptic and old flowers. My father was weak. His breathing synchronized with the heart monitor. He looked at me with eyes that were already half filled with glass. He told me I had his eyes. He said I had his iron too. I didn't believe him back then. I spent 9 years pretending he was wrong. I spent 9 years hiding in a rent-controlled apartment in Queens. I wore polyester and drank lukewarm coffee in the break room. I let Stefan call me sweetheart while I balanced his books. I watched him slap me in that ballroom tonight. The red mark on my cheek is finally starting to fade. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The news alert on my phone buzzed on the glass desk. The headline was flashing on every screen in the building. Vreeland Harris emerges from shadows. The Sinclair empire collapses. I saw my own face staring back at me in the glass. I looked regal, defiant, and completely unrecognizable. The city below was still awake, unaware of the tectonic shift. I opened the bottom desk drawer. My father's old silver flask was still there. I didn't drink. I just held the heavy metal in my palm. The silence of the 42nd floor was absolute. I picked up the telephone on the desk. It was an old-fashioned landline. I dialed the lobby security desk. A man's voice answered on the first ring. It was Miller, one of the guards who took Stefan away. He said, "Good morning, Miss Vreeland." I felt a shiver run down my spine at the sound of my own name. I told him to have the maintenance crew change the locks. Every lock from the B4 vault to the penthouse door. I hung up the phone. I took the charcoal gown to the dry cleaners and told them to throw it away. I don't need to hide the wine stains anymore. I own the vineyard. The air in the precinct smells like stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. It is 4:22 a.m. My designer heels click against the stained linoleum tiles. Each step echoes in the cramped hallway. I stop in front of the holding cell. Stefan is sitting on a narrow metal bench. His charcoal suit is wrinkled. His silk tie is gone. He looks small behind those iron bars. I don't say a word at first. I just watch him. He looks up and his face twists with a desperate, ugly rage. He lunges toward the bars. The metal rattles with a harsh, clanging sound. He starts to scream about his father and his lawyers. I feel the weight of the silver flask in my coat pocket. It is cold against my hip. I reach into my leather bag. I pull out a single sheet of heavy cream paper. It is a court-ordered restitution filing. The bold black text at the top looks clinical and heartless. I slide the paper through the narrow gap in the bars. It flutters down onto the concrete floor. Stefan picks it up with shaking hands. His eyes scan the document. He stops at the bottom line. The total amount is exactly $1.5 million. That was the balance of his SS Lux account. I added the cost of the Riedel glass he shattered at the gala. I added the dry cleaning bill for my gown. The signature line at the bottom is clear. It simply says, C. Vreeland in dark permanent ink. He looks at me and his voice cracks. He asks how I could take everything from him. I lean in close to the cold iron. I can smell the sour scent of his fear. I tell him that numbers don't lie, but people do. I tell him I've been looking at the ledger for a long time. He realizes then that the money he stole is already gone. It is sitting in a pension trust for the families he ruined. He begins to howl and grip the bars. I turn my back on him. I walk toward the exit sign. My reflection in the glass door looks taller than it did yesterday. The red mark on my cheek is almost invisible now. He never knew my last name because people like him never look at the people they think are beneath them. But from now on, every time he hears the name Vreeland, he'll feel that slap all over again. You know that feeling when the debt is finally settled? It's the only time the world feels balanced. If this story hit you, drop a like and subscribe if you want to hear more. Hit that bell and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Drop a comment below because I read every single one of them. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it there for you? Let's talk in the comments.